Duo for you today. Fernando Uribe joins us again. His first time in the Mix It Up. Not his first time on the show, regular contributor to the show. He's the host of Politically Correct via Insider NJ, New Jersey, right? And he's a university college professor. And Walker Bregman joins us on the left, great friend of the show. Trained attorney, but not practicing. And he and I don't always see eye to eye on the political views, but always a good, thoughtful conversation. All right, guys. I want to take Michael Buffer would say right now, let's get ready to rumble, because this happened when John Roberts was sworn in.
Prepared to take the oath. Will you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that in all things appertaining to the trial of the impeachment of Donald John Trump, President of the United States, now pending, you will do impartial justice according to the Constitution and the laws, so help you God?
I do.
God bless you.
Thank you very much.
So, Walker, we talked about this previously, that to me it's all kabuki theater. But what do you think is going to happen here now that it's underway officially?
Does anybody have any question about what's going to happen? I mean, really, you and I both know what's going to happen at the end of this. Nothing. So everybody that I've talked to about this, from people on the left to the center, to people on the right, everybody seems to have the same exact conclusion. So I don't really know what that says about the process, but I do think that we are probably in agreement about what is going to happen.
So, well, I'm going to ring the bell because I know Fernando probably agrees, but what do you think here? We all know what's going to happen, kind of, right?
Well, certainly, listen, practicing law is not my forte. I'll leave that to Walker, but I think it's fair to say that the president will be acquitted in the Senate. It really depends when you look at public opinion polls. You'll see that a lot of the American public looks at this as a witch hunt. A lot of the American public looks at this as sort of like a trial trying to materialize. And as far as I'm concerned, I think for a lot of people like myself that, identify as center right or even right to the right specifically, have been looking at this as just sort of a distraction. I look at this as just pretty much just election year theatrics. And again, not because I don't believe in the rule of law, I just feel that this has just become so convoluted and so partisan that I think in 2020 we need to focus on more important things, such as the economy, which is doing well. We're looking at good centrist constructionist judges being nominated to the federal judiciary. And for the most part, we're seeing home ownership on the rise, job creation. I think that's really the dynamics, John, that most Americans, regardless of ethnicity or demographic, are thinking about today.
Hey, Walker, why don't our elected officials down there have the same practical outlook on this? Like, we know what's going to happen. Well, they're going to keep two of their top candidates, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, are going to have to be in their seats when they're campaigning to be president. It's really detrimental to them.
It could be. On the other hand, I do think that there is a reason to have this trial. I don't think Donald Trump's actions were within the scope of his authority as commander-in-chief, and I think that is worth having a trial about. However, when Mitch McConnell basically announces to the public that it's a foregone conclusion what's going to happen, then I start to side with you and say that this is a bit of a distraction.
This guy never sides with me.
But that's not to say that I think what Donald Trump did was appropriate. I just think that the process here has become a farce, but it's not because of Pelosi. As much as big a critic of Pelosi as I am, I think the impeachment articles were appropriate. I think there should have been more of them.
Yeah. Well, they've yet to mention a crime in any of the articles.
It doesn't have to be a crime.
No, I know that, but I'm saying that it's high crimes and misdemeanors.
But that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a crime. Like, for high crimes and misdemeanors does not necessarily mean illegality under the law. It just means outside of the scope of your authority.
Understood. Yeah, no, I hear you. To me, if it was a real case, they would be able to cite something that looked like a crime. And, obstruction of Congress is an invented term. There's no such thing.
Well, the Government Accountability Office did just announce that they found that Donald Trump violated the Impoundment Control Act, that if he was going to withhold funding from Ukraine, he would have had to seek legislative approval. So that that is a violation of
Fernando, that all sounds good, but he still had like 20 more days till he was mandated to spend that money. So it would be an impoundment act, I think, if he went past that date.
Well, I think Walker brings up a good point about whether or not crimes are actually committed, but I think the more important thing is here, again, I think this is sort of along the lines of just partisan politics. I could be wrong, Walker, but when I look at the way that this entire scenario has played out, can we not, at least the three of us, agree that to some extent this has been mostly a witch hunt? Since he took office, I think Democrats made it very clear, especially, both in the House and in the Senate, that they were out to get the 45th president. And I think you heard it from January 2017 when he took office up until now. And it just seems that regardless, they keep taking L's, I think, in the court of public opinion. Now, they're not taking an L possibly in the court of law, but again, as you mentioned, this may not necessarily be something about crimes. My biggest issue, I would argue, is that I think for the rest of this calendar year, this is probably going to go by the wayside, because during the election season, I think most Americans aren't going to focus on this. I just think it's theatrics.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the election season. Joe Biden, of the top three contenders, he's the only one that's not going to be bogged down by this trial. So he can be out campaigning while Elizabeth Warren and Bernie, they got to sit in there.
Yes, I would. I'd consider either or both of them. But look, I've spoken to each of them and spent some time talking to them. My plea to both of them is that they stay engaged. They are talented people.
So, Fernando, these guys were colossal failures as presidential candidates. Is that the best they could do for Biden's running mate?
Well, it's interesting, as you mentioned before, that Joe Biden is going to reap the benefits of Senators Klobuchar, Sanders, and Warren having to be in Washington during the impeachment trial. And I think this just, again, subscribes to the bread and butter of what today's Democratic Party has become. The party that's fixated on identity politics, the party that's fixated on climate hysteria, on being woke, whatever that means, sort of like multicultural gibberish, sort of encouraging perpetual victimhood. I mean, this race. I just think that when you look at someone like, Robert Francis O'Rourke, his name is Robert. I can't stand the fact that he calls himself Beto because he's Irish. There's nothing Hispanic about Robert whatsoever. Or Julian Castro. It sort of boggles my mind that this is the best that Joe Biden can think of. And quite frankly, again, whether it's Joe Biden, whether it's anybody else in the field, if we look at the way, again, the economy is set up right now, we're looking at criminal justice reform in the last couple of years. We're looking at, other great job growth around the country. Again, this is just something that, short of some economic catastrophe, the president's going to win re-election in a walk. And I don't see any Democrat really giving him a fight this November.
You think he would, Walker, you think Joe Biden would consider Elizabeth Warren as a running mate?
I don't think Joe Biden's going to be the nominee.
You don't?
No. In fact, recent polling has him in second. He still leads in the averages, that's true, but I think Bernie Sanders' ground game is sort of unparalleled among the field. He has the most diverse base, he has the most diverse donor base. He is consistently, consistent. Yeah, I think that if I were a betting man, my money would be on Bernie Sanders. Right. That said, the other stuff about Trump and a cakewalk this November. Trump can talk about job growth all he wants. That's what Hillary Clinton did when she was trying to sell Obama's legacy. But at the end of the day, when you look at the economy, 40% of American households are struggling to afford basic necessities. 78% of full-time workers are living paycheck to paycheck. Most people are in debt. The student debt crisis is ballooning out of control. These are things that about half of cancer patients, a recent study found about half of cancer patients lose their entire life savings within 2 years of diagnosis due to the cost of treatment. Wow. There was just a story recently about a woman who went into the emergency room and the wait time was so long because people who don't have insurance or who can't afford it, they end up going to the emergency room. The wait time was so long, she ended up leaving and dying that same day. Terrible. So
I think
these are issues that are, kitchen table issues, and even Biden, for all of his faults and incoherence when he speaks, has mentioned this in regards to the economy, that it's really not doing that well for your average American.
Okay. All right, well, we're going to have more with Fernando Uribe, Walker Bregman. Right after this, we're going to mix it up some more. I personally think that healthcare is going to be the #1 issue in the 2020 election because it's a big deal and we need some changes. We're going to take a quick break. More Liquid Lunch right after.